Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Killing the Church. You know what it is we do here. We talk about things that are killing the church and things that need to be killed in the church. And today, we've got a very important topic for you tonight, as it's probably the one full of the most problems. This is definitely something that needs to be killed in the church. And so, without further ado, let me go ahead and get my other up here. Sir, how are you this evening?
I am wonderful. Excited about this topic. I'm surprised we haven't done one on this until now.
You know, it was one of those things too where I was like, we need an episode idea, and then it was like, wait, have we really not talked about this one yet?
Judaizers and the threat they pose to your church.
I feel like what we've done instead is we've beat around this topic so much. We've basically talked about this topic, but we've not actually talked about this topic.
Right.
So, yeah. Good evening, Bobby.
The BK.
Everyone's calling him out too. He's an icon on the show now.
He's a staple. Bobby, you can never not show up.
Funny too, he's even got our banners down. These are exactly the things we're going to talk about.
So what this means, Seamus, is that at some point you have to look for the hidden camera he's got somewhere in your home.
Yeah. It can't be in the books because he knows those get used.
Wait, one of these days it's going to be like, I'm not stalking you, but your tag's sticking out from behind your shirt.
How do you know that? Okay, so anyway, what are you drinking tonight?
Well, I've still got the Copper Dog here, but the special tonight is that I have something that is out of season because my wife loves me. So everybody knows that the fall season is my favorite season and brings about my favorite beers. So I've got an Oktoberfest here tonight because my wife she'll buy a few and set them aside in some place that I rarely ever look, and then surprise me with them later on in the year after they're no longer available.
Yeah, she loves you. She loves you dearly.
She does, I know. I'm a blessed man.
I am falling back tonight on an old favorite.
Oh boy.
This is one of those topics where this is kind of like a favorite topic of mine. So I decided to go with a favorite, the classic Redbreast whiskey 12-year.
Oh, what a good one. This. I got to get a bottle of that again. It's been a while since I've had some Redbreast.
I feel like I have it maybe once a month these days because it's just a good whiskey. Like I could have it daily.
It really is.
The problem is my whiskey collection, a lot like my book collection, many of my whiskeys go unfinished because I start many different whiskeys and always taste and try and move around. And then it takes me a while to actually finish a whiskey. And the same is true with a lot of my books, actually. It's just I sort of like I tend to start so many books that it takes me a while to finish any one book.
Likewise, I'm finishing up. There's two that I'm finishing up now. Well, one's not even a full book. I'm finishing up a manuscript that a friend has allowed me to read and wants me to review for them. So that'll be cool when that book gets finished. So far, it's been spectacular. So I'm excited to see where he goes with the rest of it.
Very well. All right. So announcement time real quick. Let's get these out of the way because you know how this goes. If you're drinking with us, first of all, drink responsibly and comment what you're drinking below. And if you got any recommendations, we will give them a shot. It's actually because of our recommendations provided by some of our viewers. We've discovered Bourbon Rabbi, for instance.
The alternate media favorite.
The alternate media official, hopefully to be officially official drink of alternate media. But
boy, man, wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah. We need to go ahead and like just reach out and be like, hey, so we love your stuff so much.
Can we buy a whole barrel and just get that dedicated to the
So we won't charge you much. If you just give us a bottle once a month, we will promote your stuff on the show once a week. How about that?
Always.
We'll see what we can do. But also this week's episode is going to be one of those episodes in which we're going to not rely. We have plenty of material to go over, but definitely ask your questions in the comment section, because this is one of those topics where it's good to have a sort of a feedback and a conversation with the viewers. So definitely do that. And then everything else, check us out online. Don't forget to hit the like button. Bless the subscribe button, believe in the like button, and visit the website, support us on Patreon if you ever feel so compelled. There's plenty of exclusive content and access that comes with that as a small thank you for supporting the ministry. And stick around to the end for the meme of the week and a couple of other things. It's the first of the month. There's a couple of things going on at the first of the month. So, stick around to the end to find out what those things are. Okay. Now, to the topic at hand. Yeah.
Judaizers.
Yeah.
Are we Judaizers, Seamus?
Let's find out. Because I'm told that I am all the time by nearly everybody. So
I would say I get that the second most after heretic.
Pharisee as well.
Right. But I don't like to accept that kind of compliment because I'm just not there. So.
I'm the same way. When people call me Pharisee, I'm like, whoa, okay.
I'm trying to be a humble man here.
That's like, if someone is like suffocating and someone goes, "Is there a doctor in the building or whatever?" And then like someone going, "That guy's a doctor," and you go, "No, but I'm not. But thanks, but I'm not." Like that's sort of what it's like when someone. Calls us Pharisees. We're like, no, we're not. Hold on. But anyway,
yeah. Whoa.
But yeah, this is one we definitely get a. All right, so let's. This one is one of those topics. So we've got a couple of things we want to cover. One is this is, believe it or not, a word that is very little understood.
Oh yeah.
And those of you who are joining our book club, the Alternate Book Club, we just read through Restoration. And this month's book is Elementary Principles. But last month's book, we actually do talk about this word a little bit. And one thing that it brings up, and I'm actually just going to, I'll save the definition for a little bit later. But this is a very misunderstood word. There's a lot of misconceptions around what this word means. Everyone seems to think of the more conventional idea that a Judaizer is simply anybody who promotes some semblance of Torah observance at any rate. I would
pretty
say
much is at any level. You pretty much, because so I know a lot of Christians that generally they keep a pretty normal modern Christian practice, but they would maybe celebrate Passover, and that's probably quite literally the only biblical holiday that they do keep. Outside of that, they maintain the rest of the Christian calendar. They keep the Christian holidays and whatnot, but they also keep Passover, and that is the level at which this accusation starts being railed, because you're doing something that's categorically unchristian. It's Jewish, so that makes you a Judaizer.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's one of those terms that actually does tend to go hand in hand with another term, a legalist.
Yes,
and. Actually, funny enough, you and I recorded a legalism episode a long time ago that I have not finished editing, and so it's not yet been released. But we do have an episode that will be coming out. It's a pre-recorded episode, so it'll be a lot like the older style Killing the Church episodes, where we're actually in the same room together. But we do have an episode dedicated to the concept, but it's very much a term that's used hand in hand, right? If you suggest in any way, shape, or form that at some level, a believer should practice any aspect of Torah for any reason, right? Be it that, we see the Master Yeshua doing it, so we should do it too. Anything like that, if it's Torah and it's a practice of some type, you will be first called a Judaizer, and then secondly, a legalist, usually in the same sentence. If not in the same sentence, in the same breath.
Right.
Yeah, so
there's a fair amount of irony in that, because there are practices that exist in Christianity that already have their roots in Judaism as it is, but these are practices that were maintained and preserved, and so they're not considered Jewish anymore. Christians more or less have no idea of the Jewish roots of them. Things like baptism. Most Christians have no idea that has its roots in mikvah, and immersion into a mikvah. The communion, right? Most don't see the similarity there with Kiddush, or better yet, even the connections with Passover. And they don't consider themselves Judaizers for these reasons. It's when you take that extra step of doing something that is even just mildly outside the scope of what is considered normative Christian, that now you're a legalist, right? Because now you're going the extra mile. Really, it kind of gives off that vibe of like, when a new worker comes in and they're just doing their normal thing, but it happens to be more than what everybody else is doing. And so, so like the Karen comes up to you, like, you really need to pace yourself because you working harder than the rest of them makes the rest of them look bad, right? That's the vibe it gives off.
It's hold on, let me get some. There we go. Lips are killing me. So no, it's just something that's like you pointed out. There's actually a lot of Judaism in Christian practice, but if you do something that's in Judaism that's not in Christian practice, even though most of Christian practice is directly related to Judaism, then you're a Judaizer. It's really weird how that works. Like a communion, that is a Jewish practice. This idea of having wine and bread together as a sort of meal, that's Jewish. And so it's funny that if you're doing those things, it's fine. You're not called a Judaizer, because many Christians don't even see that as a Jewish connection, but it very much is. So a lot of this just stems from a sense of ignorance, of not knowing that the origin of Christianity is in fact Judaism. So it's just a kind of weird accusation when you really kind of boil it down, actually. Right. So that it's one word, Judaizer, but there's two completely different understandings, different meanings. The conventional definition is largely perpetrated. That's not the word. Whatever, is largely pushed as early as the church fathers. Really, they start to employ a word like that as right. Judaizer. The funny thing is, though, that the only time in the Bible that we actually see the word Judaizer is in Galatians chapter 2, verse 14.
Right.
Yeah, it's the only time that the word comes up, and it's specifically talking about conversion. And so the way Paul is using it, he's making an accusative. He's accusing that Peter is convincing Gentiles to convert. Right. I don't think any English translations, minus the Young's literal translation, actually renders the word Judaizer, which is what it is in Greek, as Judaizer in English. Young's literal does, but every other translation says to become Jewish, which is correct. That's accurate. That's exactly what that word means. Right. So the conventional Christian normative definition of Judaizer is usually something along the lines of a person who encourages Torah practice or something of a Jewish nature.
So what began to be propagated by, the early church fathers, which I think that's the word you were looking for earlier, propagated.
Propagated.
Um,
That's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
is and for the life of me, I couldn't find the quote, but I've got an article on it that I'd read some years ago, and I skimmed through it to see if I could find the exact quote. But essentially, because we know that in the early days of Christianity, in the days of the patristic fathers, uh, the church was already moving away from more Jewish practice, and taking, in some ways, some rather extreme measures to draw a distinction between Christianity and Judaism. And part and parcel to that was also being heavily influenced by pagan practice, which, again, this is something we know historically happened, and the Roman Church even admits to this. So the precedence we see seems to be that Judaizer essentially was anybody who opposed the influence or the influx of pagan tradition in favor of the Jewish tradition, right? So we see this start happening pretty early on whenever somebody, I would dare say, even I think it was Polycarp, who wanted to maintain the practice of Passover as opposed to moving it to the day that it was ultimately going to be moved to. Or just dropping the practice altogether, he would have been considered a Judaizer by the very next generation of church fathers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So it's part of it too is just from a historical standpoint. What ends up happening is, the movement becomes very popular in the Gentile world, right? It's a way into the monotheism of Judaism without the commitment of a Jewish conversion, right? So it gets popular, and then the first Jewish revolt happens. And so now association with Jews means association with the enemy of the state. And if you're not a full converted Jew, then you're a Roman citizen. So for you to hang out with Jews from this point forward is treason. Basically, you're hanging out with the enemy. Even though the war in the Middle East has nothing to do with you, it doesn't matter. You're siding with the wrong people. And it's because you're not a Jew. So you want to continue going to synagogue and worshiping in the way that the Master Yeshua has been, the way you were taught, the only way that's really available for Christians at this time. And when the war breaks out, a couple of things happens. One, Jews don't want us, Gentiles, and two, Romans don't want you either. So you're sort of stuck in the middle, and you kind of have to pick a side. And many of them chose to side with Rome, largely because continuing to side with Jews, people who still don't like you, and we'll get into reasons why. And you basically having to die for that. Nobody wanted to do it, so they were like, it's fine. I'll just dissociate. And then there's a raging anti-Semitism that comes with that, all the way up and through the second Jewish revolt in 135 CE. And it just gets worse. And so from 70 to 135, it just exponentially continues to grow worse, where the rift keeps going and going until eventually, after the failed second revolt, the official parting of ways happens. And it's materially now a completely different religion from the way it started out as. And so the early church fathers in the mid-2nd century use these sort of tactics that are very propagandistic style tactics. They're very, really leftist style tactics, if I'm honest, to dissuade Christians from adopting anything that would remotely connect them to, the detestable Jews, and that's largely why Christianity eventually becomes a different religion. And they adopted the word Judaizer to actually help propagate this idea. And so associating with Jews at all would make you a Judaizer. They took the definition and they redefined it and pushed the redefined definition into the masses. In order to, it's one of those, if you control the language, you control the destiny. In a sense, it's very, it's very political tactic, but it's been tried and true, and every civilization has been doing it since time immemorial. But so that's sort of where it comes from. It kind of disappears for a while under Roman suppression. By the 3rd century, we don't really by the 5th century, because Jewish Christians and Torah practicing Christians actually continue to exist despite Rome and church persecution, all the way through to the 5th century. Historically, we see evidence for that. There's all sorts of, some popes even making mention of it. But then it kind of disappears until the Reformation. Once the Catholics have seized total and full control of essentially the religious world, it doesn't really reappear until Luther, and he writes a book called Against the Judaizers. And so now we see a resurgence of the term, and with the resurgence of the term comes back its sort of conventional Christian definition of just adopting practices. Go ahead.
It's an interesting thing that I've never noticed before, and this is kind of a, how the turntables, because the accusation of Judaizer historically, in other words, outside of the biblical text, in which again we only find it used once, seems to always follow anti-Semitism. It seems to always be anti-Semites who are accusing other people of being Judaizers. So it's kind of a
It is interesting, huh? No, what ended up happening is, and we've gone over this before, but when Martin Luther started putting the Bibles in the hands of common people with his with German translations and all that, people began to, as Martin Luther would basically put it, unfortunately read the Bible for themselves now. And the problem with that was everyone was coming away from reading it themselves and concluding very naturally that they should be practicing Torah. So they did. So they started practicing Torah, started keeping Sabbath, keeping the dietary laws and everything. And Martin Luther was enraged by that. So he had to write this book against the Judaizers and against the Sabbath keepers. 2 works completely dedicated to anti-Torah Christian movements, which were arising. I love how Daniel Lancaster puts it. Everywhere the Bible is read without theological manipulation, Torah observance is inevitable.
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong. It's a brilliant statement, and that's exactly like I relate to that very heavily. When I read the Bible for the first time on my own, that was a very natural conclusion of mine. And so, when he said that, I was like, yeah, actually, I feel that. Like, I feel like it wasn't until I started going to church after having read the whole Bible, and then people had to explain certain things in a certain way in order for me to think otherwise. Anyway, so the first conventional definition, I can actually read it here, because I think D. Thomas Lancaster actually does a good job here. So it's on page 15 of his book, Restoration. I'll change the banner here. So the conventional definition of Judaizer is one who encourages Christians to adopt Jewish practices, such as observance of the Sabbath and the biblical festivals. The biblical definition of Judaizer is one who compels non-Jews to become Jewish and keep the Torah as Jews in order to merit salvation. That's a big, big difference. Merely suggesting to adopt certain practices that may or may not have their origin in Jewish practice versus biblical Torah practice. And there's a difference, right? If you don't have, Jewish oral Torah to guide you, a lot of your Torah practices will be different from Jewish practice, particularly. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite examples is actually, I think I said this in a TikTok once. Torah is keep the Sabbath holy, right? So by celebrating Sabbath, you're not particularly doing anything Jewish per se. This is a biblical holiday, so it's God's holiday. But if you light candles before the Sabbath, well, that is a particularly Jewish tradition. So that would be a Jewish practice that's like how they, keep the Sabbath holy. So there's a kind of a difference there, even within the internal definition that we've come up with. But
right.
Yeah. So here is where I think we should kind of focus on some of the, I guess, Pauline stereotype comebacks that we get. In fact, let me pull up. Let me see.
Yeah,
here.
we get a lot of those. It's interesting bringing up Martin Luther earlier, because Christianity seems to be so willing to look past like the ugliness of his anti-Semitism because, well, he still did great things for the church, still did great things for the movement. And it just kind of got me thinking, it's like, well, right, how far separated by time do you have to be from somebody for it to be acceptable to still quote and uphold them in this way? Right, because regardless of whether or not there's truth to it, and kind of the reason I'm saying this is like Ravi Zacharias made a lot of statements that were very true, right? There's a lot of truth behind a lot of what Ravi Zacharias said. But you don't see Christians quoting him and posting his quotes on Facebook regularly anymore. And well, you wonder why. Well, we found out something really, really ugly about him. And so you kind of just, even if they're true statements, you still kind of avoid posting and giving credit there, even if they're true statements. And not that that's necessarily correct, but but like, so
that's
are we supposing that 1500 years from now, Martin, like it'll be okay to praise Ravi Zacharias as a great Christian leader of the 21st century? Or are we still going to be self-conscious about about who he really was? Because this is one of those things that the church today, I would say, is not necessarily being using just weights and measures when we're talking about Martin Luther,
And something like, and there's a couple of different things, it's one thing to make certain mistakes in your personal sinful life. Okay. I think it's a different thing entirely to encourage the burning of synagogues and to have a rampant sense of anti-Semitism to the point where, I mean, Hilter himself, and the no Germans, you can't say his name on YouTube, will be demonetized.
I know.
So, and the no Germans used Martin Luther as a justification for what they were doing.
A primary justification.
Now, understand, we're not saying that Martin Luther, everything he said was wrong, but this is more than just a mistake. This is a major theological framework problem. It affected the way he thought about the rest of his theology.
Yes.
In a lot of different areas and ways. Not all of them, but in a lot of ways, it affects the rest of his theologies. And so it is important to understand that if he is, dissuading any kind of Torah practice in any way, shape, or form, it's important to realize that the reason he came up with that theologically was because he was basically a no German before no Germans were no Germans.
That is savage right now.
What? Who? What?
This is, the chat is savage right now.
Oh,
people really like the no Germans.
No. So,
and of course, Austin does not approve.
Of course, he doesn't. So, kind of moving forward here a little bit. What Paul is advocating against when he talks about, Judaizing, from the biblical definition, from the way that we understand that Judaizing is actually meant to be applied, is conversion. It's this idea that you need to convert legally to a Jewish status in order to obtain or attain or maintain a sense of salvation.
Right.
That's what Judaizing is. Judaizing is the promoting of actually becoming Jewish. That's why it's called Judaizing. And then, of course, the later conventional definitions are just that. They are later conventional definitions. They are a propagation of parts of church history, but they do not meet the biblical definition. One way that we know this is in places like Acts chapter 15, where the question at hand is, do we need to have Gentiles be circumcised in order to be saved? And the answer is, of course, no, they don't. And basically everywhere you'll see this term being used, you will see it usually in conjunction with circumcision in the Bible. Now, again, Judaizing only technically shows up in Galatians 2:14. But any concept in which any normative Christian is going to use as a proof text, it's going to be in conjunction with circumcision. And as we've gone over before in the past here, circumcision is shorthand for a full, complete, legal conversion to Judaism. If you want more information on that, we have actually got a ton of information on that, particularly in our previous episode of Better Call Paul, Circumcision. That's up on the YouTube and on the and you can check that out if you need more detail on how the word circumcision is just shorthand in the Bible for a conversion process. So Brad, you can't say stuff like that. That's my joke.
There's a whole other thing going on in the chat right now, guys.
So anyway, so then the next charge is legalist, right? So we've cleared the air. Judaizing is encouraging to adopt to become Jewish. So now legalism, all right? That's usually the fallback plan when Judaizing doesn't work, and it won't work. Every time I've had this conversation, it doesn't take much more than just simply clarifying the definition of Judaizing, and then they'll usually have to fall back into the definition of legalism instead in order to. Because they can't get you on being a Judaizer, but they'll try and get you on this one. So once again, there's a conventional definition of legalism defined by normative Christianity, and then there's a theological biblical definition of legalism, which is in stark contrast to the conventional Christian lay definition. Again, these are like very, this is sort of like, again, like leftist tactics. Change the definition of words so when they're being used, there's a certain understanding that comes with them that's not the correct understanding, but it will continue to push your rhetoric, whatever that might be. And for the early church, that rhetoric was anti-Jewish anything. So once again, I think D. Thomas Lancaster sort of hit the nail here square upon the head with his. So the conventional definition of legalist: one who compels Christians to live by a certain standard or commandment of Scripture that is no longer generally practiced in the church. All right. So before I read the biblical definition, good examples are, really, it's weird how when you look at it from like a dictionary point of view, you and I, and we cover this in our pre-recorded episode of legalism. Most Christians think of legalism as being you're being imposing, right? You're adding more than is actually written or necessary. So a common one would be like, I don't think Christians should drink, right? That some Christians would say that's a very legalist position of you to add more. Where, technically speaking, legalism is more like when you follow the exact letter. So it's sort of like a malicious compliance kind of attitude, like legalism in a very real world sense outside of biblical theology. you would use this term on somebody who likes to read the law and follow it, whatever the law is, exactly to the T, to the letter, and push the envelope as far as you can get up to that line without actually breaking a law. That would be a legalistic approach.
Right. So
you could go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one of the things we discuss in that video is actually, if you are picking through, right, the nitty gritty to find a loophole around doing something the Bible says to do, you are also a legalist.
Right. Yeah. So, and it does. Yeah. I don't remember what examples we came up with in that pre-recorded video. I think we recorded it like literally 2 years ago.
Yep.
So
it's been a minute.
I'm just really behind on all that. Life's been hectic recently, but
we'll save it for another vacation week when like we're like out of town, but we have to air something for the week.
Yeah. So D. Thomas Lancaster offers a much more concise and correct biblical theological definition of legalist: one who attempts to earn salvation through obedience to the law. I think that's a good one. I think this idea that your obedience is the only reason for your obedience is to hold on to salvation, right? Like you think by maintaining your sense of obedience that you're maintaining your sense of salvation. That would be a sense of legalism, or to do them so that you have salvation, right? Like that's a much more correct biblical definition of legalism. But yeah, so, depending on who you're talking to, legalism can be any number of, it can be a couple of different definitions. There's really no singular Christian definition of legalism. Some might think that me justifying having a drink is legalistic. And other Christians would say that me having a drink is not legalistic, but the other side is legalism. To tell me that I can't have a drink is legalistic. So we have two different Christians using the same word legalism on the same subject matter with two completely different understandings of what they mean by legalism. So it's just another one of those things where we have to sort of push the rhetoric aside and be careful with the words that we use and what we mean.
It usually will fall in the extremes too, and it will be those two extremes. It'll be the people that have this strict code that they adhere to that maybe is not biblical. And I think that that's another context in which a lot of Christians think the word legalism means is like, well, you have a strict adherence and imposition on things that are not even in the Bible, right? But they're things that you believe are derived from the Bible, but they're not directly spoken. Anyway, so you have that side, right? You have like the independent fundamental Baptist would be an example of that side, right? Your Steven Andersons. And then on the other side, you've got the people who, again, look for every reason to be as ambiguous as possible in their interpretation of Scripture so that they can get away with not putting any effort into living a holy lifestyle. So, you've got your more progressive styles of Christianity, and they're at opposite ends of this spectrum, and they tend to be the extremes. Somewhere in the middle is where I think you'll probably hear the word legalism less.
Yeah, it just depends. Like, there are times when I'm having this conversation and I get called a legalist. Depending on the context, but there are some contexts in which I say, all right, so by your definition of legalism, and I'll have them clarify, and I'll say it back to them so they understand that I understand what their point is. I say, okay, but I need for you to understand that by your own standard that you've set for yourself here in the definition of legalism, that Yeshua, that Jesus, would be a legalist. And go straight to the Sermon on the Mount. And it's like, this is very legalistic of him. That the letter of the law is, no adultery. It's super legalistic to imply that you can't so much as look at another woman. that's
A-
legalism,
Actually, applying the legal mandate concerning adultery to men in general would be considered legalistic.
rather than
If we
married
take
men.
a super literal approach to the words of the Torah, men cannot commit adultery.
I mean, technically speaking, yeah. If you do take just a literal rendition without any outside help, if you sola scriptura, if you will,
Yep.
Men cannot commit adultery. It's not possible. And that's why sola scriptura is a bad doctrine, by the way. So yeah, and then of course the other way, some people say, well, that's very legalist to just read the letter and try to ride that line. It's like, okay, well, so which is it? So yeah, it's one of those things where we often say these words, and it's important moving forward to clearly define what we mean when we say certain words. And this is one of those words that I don't think gets defined clearly often enough. And so many Christians go into conversations immediately with the Judaizer card in hand. They're like, all right, here we go. I'm gonna throw it down. Torah Observant Judaizer. Yeah. And they're just so ready to use this card, and they don't realize that it's an unloaded card, that there's no value in that card, that they're not using it correctly. You're trying to use an Apple gift card at the Target. It's not going to do anything.
Well, I think that's probably one of the funnier things about it too. Like okay, so the accusation of Judaizer, the accusation of legalist, especially within the context that they're used, they really do treat it like it's a trump card. Like as soon as I say, "Oh, you're a legalist," that's it. I won the argument, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, okay, I don't care what you call me. Prove me wrong.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good.
I don't care about titles. Prove me wrong.
So, yeah. So, Judaizing. This kind of brings us to our sort of concluding thoughts, and then we'll turn it to the chat. There's a couple of things I starred, at least one question. So, Brad, are we Judaizers?
No, we are not Judaizers.
No, we are not. We do not encourage legal conversion to Judaism in any way, shape, or form. And by simply encouraging that Messianic Gentiles in general, Christians, whatever, adopt Torah practices in the same manner as Yeshua, the Messiah, that's not Judaizing. And it's not legalism either. If anything, it's the basic definition of discipleship, actually, if anything.
Yep. I mean, to walk like he walked, the idea of being a disciple was to become as much like your Rebbe as possible, to become the mirror image of him. So if he walked in Torah, then, we've made that. That's a horse we have beat beyond to death.
If it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. That's really what it comes down to. But yeah, we even had a debate this time last year about this very topic.
We, matter of fact, it's funny the way that the Discord has gone. Speaking of which, go and join the Discord if you'd like to discuss more topics like this. Yes. But in the Discord, we've had some conversations kind of surrounding that debate, and there have been people who have now come and let us know that they came around to observance because of that debate, which is, Baruch Hashem. Like that's always the hope that comes out of that kind of a situation. Was a fun debate for our part. Super hostile. The chat got extremely toxic very quickly, but good memories.
Yeah. Speaking of, I was getting our meme of the week ready. I chose one. I hope you agree with the choice. If
Absolutely.
not, oh well. If not, oh well. But let's see here. So as we as we move into this very last topic, start getting those questions in the comments ready. So go ahead and start asking any questions you want to run by us. I'll put them up. We got a couple from forever ago that we'll get to. So anyway, so are we Judaizers? No, unless you're going to stick to the conventional definition, then I guess so. But you know, I rebuke the conventional definition.
In Jesus' name.
So clearing the air of rhetoric. All right. The thing is, at the end of the day, this is really just an ad hominem attack. Like, let's be real. Those of you who are out there using this word, it's because you know you're in a losing conversation. And so this is sort of your go-to. This is where you can go, you know, there's some validity you think to the statement, and it's enough of an insult you believe to this statement that you can sidestep the conversation or discredit everything else that the person has just previously said to you with this particular. It's rhetoric. It is it's a very political style tactic, often employed by leftists to take what was a accepted word and redefine that word for the purposes of pushing said rhetoric in order to make somebody or something look bad and get the populace on their side.
Making up words to win arguments, to quote a great American philosopher / comedian.
Well, it's like, I don't know if you guys remember this, but like when the definition of a recession was 2 straight quarters of negative GDP, right? And right before the second quarter came out and they knew it was going to be bad, they were like, well, it's not going to be a recession because a recession is actually, and then they completely redefined the word just before those numbers came out because they knew that was a losing argument. And so suddenly it had a completely different definition from the conventional accepted definition for a long time. And you know, the church fathers did exactly this. They had an agenda. They were part of the Roman Empire. They definitely had reasons to push their own beliefs and to make sure that it was successful for the betterment of their particular community, Rome, you know, whatever it is they wanted to justify. It's classic politics, and church history is rife with ugly politics. Anyone who's studied any amount of church history will tell you that it's very dirty very quickly. Church history is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's just rhetoric. So stop the rhetoric, everybody. This whole, you're a legalist, you're a Judaizer. I know of almost nobody that's actually going around out there trying to convince Christians to convert to Judaism. Even Torah observant Messianic Jew, Messianic Gentile, almost 100% of them are not going to try and convince you to convert to Judaism. They don't want that. Right. A great majority of the Hebrew roots movement wants nothing to do with Judaism at all. Yeah. So they would definitely never encourage a conversion to Judaism in any way, shape, or form.
Quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah. So this is not only a not true word, but it's so dated, it's not even applicable.
Yeah.
When Paul was using it, it was applicable. Go ahead.
Right. I was going to say, it just, honestly, it looks bad, which again, I mean, we've already expressed that this is not somebody who's interested in having an honest debate who's going to, you know, use this title. It's cap. It's intended to be a silencer. You know, it's intended to, you know, quiet the opposing side before they have a chance to speak. That's really all it is.
Yeah. I usually, when these sort of words kind of start to come out of the woodwork in conversations, I begin to rapidly end the conversation as quickly as I can, because it's as Misty C here noticed, I've noticed a good number of those that use the term have already made up their minds and really don't want to be convinced otherwise. Yeah, it's very true. I often find that as well. So Yeah. Yeah. Stop the rhetoric. Stop using these terms. To what my Christians out there, because these are, I can guarantee you, I can almost 100%. Now, you can't say anything with absolute certainty like that, but pretty darn close with absolute certainty. I can guarantee that almost no Messianic Torah practicing Christian, one, either thinks of himself as a Judaizer, not a single one does, and two, is not actually a Judaizer by definition. And no Torah observant, well, maybe there might be some, but again, by and large, the large majority of Torah observant Christians will tell you that they don't believe any of this is indicative of your salvation.
Right.
And that's a big part of this. Is we're not out here encouraging people in order to maintain their salvation or to be saved in the first place by adopting and practicing Torah. That's not what, I don't know any Messianic Jews or Messianic Gentiles. I don't know any that would ever say such a thing. We almost all universally say the same thing. Almost all of us say we keep Torah because we're saved, right? Rather than the other way around.
Right. Yeah. No, you'll find a few on the fringe, and they are on the fringe, and it's important to recognize that it is the fringe, because you cannot judge the whole by the fringe. For if we were judging the whole by the fringe, there are a lot of really, really extreme views that we could superimpose onto the Gen Pop of Christianity if that were the case.
Yeah, it's tempting to want to beat them at their own game, but no, stop the rhetoric. It's not applicable. It doesn't make any sense. And no one, again, it's not a good argument. If you're going to come to the table, message to all my Christians out there, if you're going to come to the table and you truly think that the person you're speaking to is trying to convince you to convert to Judaism, or trying to convince you that Torah observant is essential to your salvation, if you think that, and he really before the conversation begins, you're the problem. You're the problem. You're going to immediately start talking past each other. Understand that no one thinks that way. Almost nobody thinks that way until that person gives you a reason to think that he truly believes that Torah is absolutely 100% necessary for salvation to be achieved. Then that's not something you should ever think. So don't go into that conversation having that thought, because then you're all right. You've, as Misty C has already said, you've basically made up your mind. You're not even ready. You're not there to have that conversation. It's you're the problem.
Interesting. This here, yeah. There's a group of Torah observers calling us Judaizers. Yes.
Yeah, usually from the Hebrew Roots movement.
Usually it's from the Hebrew Roots movement, which can tentatively be said that they observe Torah. But the ironic part about that, right, is that it's often resorting to very modern, typical Christian arguments that this happens. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, look, you've come out of this into Torah observance, and you at one point would have used very Christian arguments against Torah observance and called that Judaizing. So, like, if you find yourself in a position using the same arguments again for something else that maybe is just a little bit in another direction that you aren't really as familiar with, maybe familiarize yourself with it instead of reverting back to your normative Christian position, because that's really what it is. It's like, I don't know. It's like a really, really regressive behavior. So, 54 minutes. We got a couple of minutes. I got at least one question here starred from Timothy 4, and then I won't say the rest. But what do you think about conversion to Judaism? A valid question. Sure.
Why? And by that I mean to someone who would think of doing it. It's like, why? Right.
What is your reasoning for wanting to, if that's something that you want to, for whoever it is that may want to. What is your reasoning? Like that's really what you need to be thinking about at that point.
Yeah, by and large, what I would say is I would largely discourage it. It's not necessary. But it depends on the context of certain things. Here at Alternate Media, we do encourage a very orthodox lifestyle. And you may actually find yourself, dating a Jewess. And in order for that marriage to be halachically valid in an Orthodox context, it might be necessary for you to go through conversion. And then, if that community accepts you for who you are, and then you go through the conversion, and you both are on the same page, and now you have halakhically Jewish kids, you have a halakhically Jewish marriage, that might be a reason to do something like that. But by and large, it really would depend on your context on why you would choose to do something like that. But for anyone that is, I would say, generally I would discourage it. And the primary reason is it's pertinent that you first understand that it does nothing for you. It does not affect you in the hereafter in any way. And if you think that it does, then definitely don't. But if you fully understand that it does nothing for you as far as the world to come goes, and you have a completely different reason and context in which you would find it necessary or what have you, then we could talk about it. It might be a little different, but otherwise, no. Why bother?
Right. And even Orthodoxy themselves would really. They would take the same position, right? That would be their number one question: is why? Why do you want to?
Yeah. Usually the question is like, why do you want to be a Jew? Don't you know that we're the most oppressed people on the planet? Why in the world would you want to do that to yourself? Right. Many Jews that I talk to, they say something like, well, I am more or less compelled and have to obey the commandments, but you don't have to. So why would you want to? Like, that's kind of their thoughts on it. Whereas they feel like they have a duty versus you are not necessarily bound by that duty at all. And so they're sort of like, why would you want to put yourself under a position in which you would be bound to dutifully do the things that you're not required to do right now? Like right now, you're not required. And so you can do them if you want. And it's very admirable if you do. But as soon as you convert, it's no longer admirable that you're doing these things because now you have to.
Yeah, there are messianic groups that do conversions, but those conversions are not halachic and they are not recognized by Judaism. So they can claim that they're converting you, but the rest of Judaism is not going to accept it.
Well, so what they're doing is they're converting you into a messianic conversion, really. What Paul was dealing with in his day, there was no Messianic Judaism in his day. There was no Christianity in his day. There was Judaism, and then there were those within Judaism who believed that Yeshua was Messiah. And the Gentiles who joined themselves to this movement believed that conversion was not necessary. Paul was fighting against a crowd that believed, which was the dominant position of his day by Rabbi Shammai, that in order to be accepted into the community in any way, you had to convert. And if you wanted a place in the world to come, you had to convert. If you wanted to eat at our table, you had to convert. And so Paul was fighting against that. And that's why people felt so compelled to convert in their day, in Paul's day. And so that's what he was fighting against. This is not an issue today. Modern day Judaism no longer holds to Beit Shammai. So this is not generally the position that Judaism takes any longer. And so the need for conversion is no longer incentivized by a sense of, not having a place in the world to come, or even the ability to eat at the table of a Jew. So by and large, anyway, you'll find some exceptions from different communities depending on where you go. If you're not Jewish, you're not welcome. It depends. But by and large, Hillelite Judaism, which is the Judaism today, is very friendly towards Gentiles.
Right.
So yes, Messianic groups do conversions, but they would not be recognized by Judaism, which is what Paul was discouraging. It was not, there's no reason to, and you shouldn't convert to Judaism. Because again, Christianity didn't exist. So for many Gentiles coming into the faith, their only option was Judaism. And that's why they did feel like they felt that it was necessary to convert.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, meme of the week.
Meme of the week. Let me go ahead and pull open this and do screen sharing. Let me. I gotta get a couple of things here out of the ways. Screen share window. All right. So congratulations to Gil Soto. I chose this meme largely because of the topic. So
that's spectacular.
Yeah. I've seen one where it's the same meme, but he's like, this lamb is so burnt, it satisfies Levitical law. Okay. And for the book club winner, in fact, let me go ahead and stop sharing the screen. Okay. So the winner of the January book club, which, not the book club, the book giveaway, which is March's book. So this is the book here, Besora. And so this is, if you're doing the book club, it is March's book. And so we're going to give it away now, so that way it will get to you in time to do the book club for March. The winner of Besora is, and actually he's in the chat. I'm going to just click on his name and bring him up. Wait, I'm actually going to go to the top, and I'm going to let somebody else announce who won the chat, or who won the book. Right here. Where'd he go? And the winner of the book giveaway for January is Bobby K. And I remember that Joshua had written down just Bobby K's name, and I was like, perfect. So congratulations, Bobby K. Besora is yours. If you already have that book, which I don't know that you do, I know you have Restoration, but if you already have that book, we can do a redraw, but you say, what?
Calm down now.
Yeah, none of that. Yeah, celebrating is legalism. None of that. So congratulations, Bobby. You are the winner, and so we will see you for March's book club. Also, thank you, by the way, for joining us on the January book club, which we read Restoration. And of course, this month is Elementary Principles by D. Thomas Lancaster.
Ooh, wonderful.
Yep.
Wait, that's what you're doing. That's what you're going over in the book club this month.
Yes. So this month's book club is Elementary Principles. Okay. But this month's book giveaway for February is April's book club book. So we give them away 2 months in advance. That way you have them. And that is Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes, Removing Cultural Blinders to Better Understand the Bible.
Nice.
This is a fantastic book. I usually recommend this book to people who are at least generally familiar with a sort of Torah Observant movement. This book does not teach you anything about Judaism, but it by and large, I mean, it will. There's some parts in there. But its primary goal is to show you that as a Western thinker, you have a completely different way of processing information than an Eastern mind does. And the entire Bible is written entirely by Eastern minds. So it's a fantastic book at making you self-aware of the fact that, you know, when you read the Bible, you get certain things out of it that are not at all intended by the Eastern writers. And you have to become familiar with the way that they think and the way that they process information and what certain things mean to them. And that book does a really good job at setting the stage for that. So I really like this book. And so that's going to be April's book club book, but that is February's book giveaway. So,
Nice.
one last question here. Have y'all read anything Shmuley Boteach? Thoughts? I did read Kosher Jesus by Shmuley Boteach. I mostly read it as a hostile witness to see if he had any good, legitimate, what is it? What's the word? I'm just not good with words tonight. Objections to the messiahship of Yeshua. And not really. By and large, his understanding of Jesus is the same as normative Christianity's, with a few exceptions, being Jewish himself. He has different understandings that come with that. But he seems to be operating under the same normative Christian assumptions in certain areas. I did read it. It was good. Most of the book is actually meant to show Christians that Jesus was a rabbinic Jew, more or less.
Right.
And so for that, it's good. And then he doesn't really spend a lot of time, if any, on why he doesn't think that Jesus is the Messiah. He doesn't really care enough to explain it a whole lot. So we should have Solberg on as a guest. You're funny.
You should mention that.
That's the new meme of the week right there. This guy.
We had another person on the Discord today mention how Solberg actually pushed them into Torah observance
because of his poor arguments.
because of the arguments.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just not impressed with Dr. Solberg. It's just one of those things where I read his name, Dr. Solberg. I was like, all right, he's a scholar. And then so I started, seeing what he had to say, and I just wasn't impressed. He's, it's almost as though he's never heard of the Torah Observant movement until like last year.
I would say he's doing par for the course for Christianity, right? Yeah. Christianity, by and large, doesn't really have any good arguments that they offer against atheism, and in the general Gen Pop church, right? Well, I'm not talking about theologians and apologists and whatnot that actually have good arguments. I mean, the ones that we grew up learning in youth group against atheism are not good arguments, right? So Solberg is offering that. He's offering the kind of anti-Torah arguments that probably youth groups are going to be learning, which are not good arguments.
Yeah, and so I wasn't impressed by a lot of stuff what I've seen. I am going to review one of his videos. I have it saved, and I have to finish doing the review process. But yeah, there's a video he put out, and there's just a lot of issues. It's just one of those things where like you're supposed to be a doctor, dude. Like I kind of expect better, but I'm not opposed to having him on.
I've still got to review his debate with Tovia Singer, because I mean that interesting subject, right? Because I both agree and disagree with both of the interlocutors. But again, it's just much as I support the point that he was arguing, I don't think he argued it that well.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap it up. So don't forget to bless the like button and believe in that subscribe button. We thank you for your generous support. Okay. If you want to support the ministry, you can do so at our website at alternatemedia.com. That's ALTARNATE media.com. You can become a member there and get exclusive access to premium content through your support, as well as Patreon/alternate media. That's ALTARNATE media for the Patreon. Giving at any level gives you access to exclusive content and the Discord privileges that come with that, including the after parties, which is what we're about to do immediately following this show, where we hang out with anyone who is a supporter who wants to chill out with us after the show. You can sit down, have a one-on-one conversation with us, or sit in complete and total awkward silence if you want. It's whatever you guys want to do. You can roast us. You can ask us questions about the topic, or we can talk about anything. We can talk about our favorite drinks, favorite cigars, whatever it is you guys feel like you want to talk about. But yeah, that's for the Patreon and the website supporters. Again, membership starts at $1. And so at any level, any support, you will have access to those exclusive contents and those Discord rights. I think that's it for the announcements. Oh, and even if you're not going to be a supporter, get on the Discord anyway. We've got plenty of free stuff on the Discord. We have dedicated instructors on the Discord who can answer your questions. The discussion panels are very lively at times. And yeah, we'll be in there. So you can still hang out and talk with us. So you don't have to be a supporter to still get a chance to hang out with us. So, okay. I think that's it for the announcements.
Yep.
That's it for closing announcements.
Yeah. Suppose it's time to get over to the after parties.
I suppose. Yeah, it's 10 after. Let's go.
It's a privilege that you get if you are a supporting member, either the Patreon or the website. Both of those get you that. And we would love to hear from you. I'm still waiting to be roasted. That has yet to happen. Nobody has roasted me. And they say it's all part of the roast, and I just don't believe them. I think they're depriving me of this joy of being roasted. So, stop victimizing me. And we need some new faces in the after party. So definitely come join us if you wish to. We hope that this has blessed you tonight. We certainly hope to see you in the after parties if you will be there. And with that said, l'chaim.
L'chaim.